Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 4:30 p.m. session of the 2016 Open Simulator Community Conference. As a reminder to our in-world and web audience, you can view the full conference schedule at conference.opensimulator.org and tweet your questions or comments to @OpenSimCC with the hashtag #OSCC16. We are happy to introduce the session called Evaluating VR Platforms, Open Simulator, Unity 3D, WebGL, and Other Applications. I am Cynthia Cologne, aka Lyr Lobo, your moderator. Our speakers today are Michael Cerconi, Adam Frisby, Krista Lopez, and Ramesh Ramlal. Michael Cerconi is a core developer for the Open Simulator project and 3D content developer for Incitra and for Dialogue. Michael has been involved with the Open Simulator project since July of 2007, and he's one of the original founders of OS Grid. His primary interest in Open Simulator has been to improve the software by providing technical support and to foster communication between the core development team to debug and provide the most stable platform possible. Adam Frisby is one of the founding developers of Open Simulator, the largest open source virtual world platform. Before joining Sinewave Entertainment, he founded the Azure Islands, a community with a peak of 400 regions in Second Life, and DeepThink, a leading virtual world development company. Space is Sinewave's Entertainment's virtual world platform. First developed in 2008 and now at version 7.1, it has been tested with millions of users and has a huge set of features. Dr. Krista Lopez, aka Diva Canto, is a professor with the Department of Informatics Computer Sciences at the University of California, Irvine. She is a core Open Simulator developer who developed the Hypergrid. In 2016, Krista was the first woman to be awarded the $10,000 Pizzigati Prize that honors software developers who are working to develop open source applications that aid activists and nonprofits involved in struggles for social change. Dr. Ramesh Ramlal, Computer Science, Lancaster University, UK, BTech Computer Science and Engineering, IT Kanpur, India, has been developing immersive virtual learning environments for diverse user groups during the past 7 years on platforms that include Second Life and OpenSim. He is currently the CEO, CTO of Deep Semaphore, LLC, an e-learning and simulation solutions company. And now, we'll move to our schedule. We're going to be talking about evaluating the suitability of various platforms such as OpenSim, Unity 3D, WebGL, and many others for various types of applications. Current virtual environment developers often find it difficult to pick a suitable virtual reality platform to support their application. This panel is an opportunity for developers proficient in current competing platforms to share their experience and to discuss future platform evolution trajectories. It will also allow OpenSim core developers to differentiate OpenSim from its peers. To kick us off, let's see. Ramesh, why don't we start with you and have you talk about multiverse architecture evolution trajectories and what that means to you?
Well, okay. So, the idea of the multiverse, I actually understood this idea only after joining OpenSim. I was a refugee from Second Life, and the idea that you can actually basically create your own world and host it locally and have these worlds connect with each other, that's, I think, what's, what actually makes a true multiverse in my view. It's kind of a fractal of worlds. And there's been a lot of virtual reality platforms around that seems to be addressing this issue from different directions. and that depends on how they actually started. Just to give you an example, for example, if we take Grand Theft Auto, for example, it started as a game, and the focus was on the physics engine and the kind of interactivity that's expected of games, and then it moved and started to inject some multi-user online shared experience functionality, and it seems that now they are struggling to get into a large space where people even they can create their own experiences, and it's kind of like a unplanned ad hoc way of evolving, and you can have like communities of modders, etc. And that's not only the case for Grand Theft Auto, but for many similar gaming platforms where it's evolving and people are trying to patch it up and try to make it more deeply collaborative as we go along. And then we have something that, such as Second Life, which started from ground up, with the idea of collaboration and collaborative building, and then we evolved. And then we have, what I see OpenSim as an evolution from Second Life. So you have different platforms evolving and competing evolving at different speeds. And a similar thing for Unity 3D. The multi-use aspect, multiplayer aspects is something that got introduced much later. It was not started with collaborative interactions right from the beginning. So that's what gets me thinking when I see the topic of the evolution trajectories, and which platform will win. That remains the big question, because if you pick the path where the path actually leads to solutions that generates a lot of money, then you have more capital to invest, and you can be more stable. In OpenSim, for example, we started with the idea of deep collaborations, but then it seems that the challenge is to end up with a product that you can sell and generate money, and use that money to inject back and to sustain that effort. So it's kind of interesting to see all these factors involved, and of course predicting which platform is going to win is difficult.
Thank you, Ramesh. And now let's see, we'll just go right on down back towards me. So Krista, what does multiverse architecture evaluation trajectories mean to you from your perspective?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. What does the evaluating VR platforms? So let me just give you an overview of the ones that I know best. So there's Open Simulator, which is the Second Life. In the Second Life family, there's Unity 3D, which I've also used in several flavors. There are WebGL. That's the web and WebGL, and there's others coming along. But basically, I think there's two angles under which we can evaluate these platforms. The two angles are content and social interaction. So for content production, the different platforms have different ways of approaching content creation, and also because they have different ideas about what the end product is. So if you go into platforms like Unity 3D or Unreal Engine or something like that, what you have there is the model that there is an editor, there's the author, there's an authoring tool that people can use to produce content that then lots of other people are going to experience. So there's the content producers, which are the 3D virtual environments, and then there's the content consumers that just experience that environment that has been produced by this authoring tool. That's actually a very interesting model. It's more like the gaming model, really. And if you want a game, And then if you want, if that's what you want, I think that's the right way of doing it. You don't want your players probably to, unless it's by design, but very likely you want to have a lot of control over what's going on in the scenes. And so you want to produce the content sort of offline by professionals and then have your players experience. So the other part that I said, the other axis I think that can be evaluated is the social interaction. And now social interaction also exists in when you do game development. You have a team and you have interaction between the different people of the team who are building that game. And in some cases it's a very large team when you have these very expensive games. Either it's just indie game developers, 1 or 2 people shops, but in any case, you do have interaction in terms of the people on the team, and then later when the game is developed between the people who play the game, that may or may not be multi-user. So I think that one thing that happened with Second Life and then OpenSim inherited is that it went really strong on the social interaction to the point of overlapping it with content creation. So it was just this one platform where content creation and social interaction were just two sides of the same coin. And that's a very interesting model. It's not the only one, and it's good for some things. It's not good for, so it's very good. I mean, it's a lot of fun in creating content together. It's definitely very good for collaborative builds. So for collaborative scene creation, it's really good. It's a lot better than the other alternatives, which involve a lot of external tooling that you kind of have to put on top of the 3D editor. So if you're going to try to make a collaborative build in Unity 3D, you have to add a lot of tools to it in order to be able to be even possible. And there's a lot of process that needs to happen. So anyway, I'll stop here, but I just wanted to kind of go back to sort of my 2 key points. It's just 2 dimensions, at least that can be evaluated, which is content creation, the ease of content creation, the flexibility, the richness, and the other axis is social interaction. Again, the ease of social interaction, the ease of coordination and communication and all that. And I think those would be the 2 axes in which I would evaluate VR platforms.
Thank you, Krista. And for you, Nebadon, for multiverse architecture evolution trajectories, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think I'll expand a little on some of the things Krista talked about, and that's I think for things to grow considerably, and I think one of the reasons that Second Life did so well is that it had such a simple interface, and that maybe sounds a little crazy to people because it is kind of complicated at first glance, but if you start looking at things like 3D Studio Max and Maya, it's a tinker toy in comparison. And it really kind of opened the door to non-creator types to have the ability to build. But the problem is that now people want they want AAA video game quality, and what that does is it makes the content creation tools much more complicated, and people want easy access to WebGL, which requires a much higher skill set for creating content. So right now we have this huge gap between what people want and what people who are creating content can deliver on this kind of scale that these systems would need. So what I think we really need for this trajectory is some kind of bridge like Unity, which is a great tool that kind of takes all these really advanced, fancy shaders and features that are kind of lacking in Second Life, and really cool lighting systems and the ability to animate things beyond what we can do here, without having to use weird scripting and hacks and things like that. So I think the key to really getting there is improving the tools and maybe, you know, I know Adam's working on some stuff with Space that uses Unity, which really I've been kind of tinkering with Unity myself with his platform and just kind of on my own, and I'm finding it really, really easy to use compared to something like Unreal Engine or other things that I've looked at, like some WebGL platforms like 3.js, and where they get really, really complicated and you have to really understand code on the code level. Where Unity is lots of like drop-down menus and flow chart type screens and things like that, where it's, you know, if you're used to using things like Microsoft Word and Microsoft Visio and standard Office tools, you're going to kind of understand the Unity interface. And then I go and look at things like High Fidelity, and it's, you know, they seem to be going kind of the other direction, and making things more complicated than they need to be. So yeah, I think, you know, I think we kind of need to build this bridge to bring both sides, the builder types and and the people who are going to be using these worlds, kind of bring them together and meet somewhere in the middle. And I think that was really the magic that Second Life and Linden Lab had early on, because it allowed everybody to kind of do everything. But I think we've kind of all outgrown that with the, you know, their kind of old generation graphics and stuff now, and we really need to move on.
Thank you, Neb. And what a lovely segue for you, Adam.
Yes.
He kind of sets you up there for Space and then also Unity 3D. And I don't know if you noticed, but there was a question for you also about what kind of creation for Kinematic Soup. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I actually answered that one in chat. I was just referencing a multi-user extension for Unity that allows you to have multiple editors working on Unity scenes side by side. So it gives you that sort of real-time collaboration. At the same time, you get to play around with professional tools, and that's actually something that is compatible with Space, which is where I come in. So to answer the sort of the overarching question, where do I think things are going to go? Well, I kind of have to say I've been branched off from OpenSim for a while now. I stopped actively developing OpenSim back in 2010, and immediately switched over to building what has become Space. And I think that the thing we've been trying to answer is, how do we enable people to create really high quality content without too much work? And there's, when you come down to the high end barriers, which I think everyone has been sort of edging around, is that there is a huge gap between what you can do as a general user without much knowledge and experience, and what you can do as a professional user using professional tools. And I've said this before, there is a huge gulf between the capabilities of professional 3D modeling applications, even things like Blender, and Blender is actually pretty good these days. Blender, 3ds Max, Maya, I mean, all of those tools you can do amazing things with if you know what you're doing. Mix it up with some newer generation tools like Substance Painter for doing physically based rendering on your materials, and you can get absolutely stunning AAA quality graphics. The problem with trying to build a virtual world that enables that immediately and enables all the users to have access to those tools is you need to build the superset. That is, you need to build every single feature that's in those professional tools in order to have a chance at creating content that looks as good as what you'll find in a AAA game. And I think that is barking up the wrong tree. And the reason for that is, by the time you're done building that superset, the industry will have moved on. So with Space, we've been really following heavily the developments in the game industry. So the game industry basically throws out its graphics engines every 3 years, and something new comes along that necessitates learning a new tool chain and necessitates new and better tools that enable you to produce higher and higher quality content each time. Second Life's renderer is based sort of somewhere around 2003. That's where it got stuck technologically. There's been some efforts to improve that a little bit. I know the materials came a couple of years ago that sort of pushed it up to 2006. But ultimately, you're still using a fixed function renderer that looks quite dated. And so if you want to actually get into the realm of producing really high quality content that can create really immersive experiences, then you need to sort of tag along with the latest and greatest in graphics engines. And Unity 3D is a great choice because it does have a lot of documentation. It's relatively easy to use. As far as the big game engines go, it's certainly the easiest. And it can be approached. But I'm gonna circle back and come back to the topic of the future. I think the future in virtual worlds is really high quality, high detail experiences that are great for a mass market audience. Second Life kind of touched on getting into mass market, but everyone sort of fizzled out fairly quickly. There was a very high churn ratio of new users just sort of leaving out. And the reasons for that are complicated, but I think that there is a few of them. One, the performance wasn't great for many years. Really, the experience was not good for new users. Second reason was it was difficult. The interface was hard to access for new users. Third, you have to grab a desktop client. You've got to have a reasonably high-powered PC. You've got to be prepared and capable and comfortable setting up and installing software. And there is a huge audience out there that don't fill those gaps. And I think ultimately the future, if any virtual world takes off, it's going to sort of solve a few problems. It's going to solve first accessibility. It's going to be really easy to get into the world. You'll be able to do it on everything from a tablet or a phone through to a web browser through to your desktop. That is the first thing it will solve. The second thing it will solve is it'll bring the user interface complexity right down. It'll be at the point where you can immediately look at the world and say, okay, this is how I use it. I understand this. I'm not reinventing the wheel with user interfaces and things like that confuse a lot of users. And the third magical thing that I think needs to happen for virtual worlds to really sort of take off and gain very widespread appeal is high quality content. There is a whole gap between where virtual worlds are today and where they should be in order to produce high quality content. It's not just graphics that matter, it's everything else. It's from animation to audio. I mean, you try and set up a full spatial 3D surround audio that you'd find in a typical game in a virtual world, and you'll find that it'll all fall to bits. That's something that's sort of been completely left off the side. Interactivity, it's hard to set up interactive elements in most virtual worlds. You've actually got to be a scripter to go ahead and do that. And I think that locks out a big audience as well in terms of creators, that you've got a lot of creators who know how to make nice looking things, but they don't know how to add interactivity and those sorts of elements through to them. And I think that solving those problems will actually be where the future lies. And I think if you ignore those problems, you're going to be stuck where all the previous generations of virtual worlds, going back to active worlds and earlier, I mean, it's all been the same problems coming up over and over again that have inhibited it from becoming a mass market enterprise.
Thank you. You know, you just led me back into another topic, but I'm going to return back to Ramesh. And what I thought we'd do in the interest of time is combine the next two thoughts. So as we think about user content generation, which of course Adam had started to discuss there, strengths and weaknesses of competing VR platforms. So we think about the different platforms, and then we think about user content generation. What do you have to add to this, Ramesh?
Okay, one of the things I noticed when the word user content generation is mentioned, especially the content generations tend to be understood as something that principally is within the hands of the designer of the real world, of those virtual worlds. I kind of want to think of content generation in a much broader perspective. So if I have a user in a virtual world and he wants to move a basket of apples from a table and put it, somewhere else, that user shouldn't need to have a designer come in, or that user doesn't need to go into the editor mode to do this. So pretty much like in the real world, we are manipulating objects directly just by being in the real world. In that world, we are already creating content. Okay, so I'm taking that perspective of content generation, because when people interact directly in the world, they organize their workspace in a particular way, that becomes a signature of who they are. When somebody else walks into your office and see how your office is organized, whether you've got like papers on the floor and things around, they get a sense of what's happening, and it's kind of you're actually expressing something and communicating something out. So that's content generation. But it's a fine grain level, which is important because it's to me it's like a means of expression, and I see no platforms today that allows this kind of fine-grained interaction capabilities. And I think that's only when we reach that level of interaction, then we'll have people creating content and who are not designers, not scripters, not programmers, and they will be making the millions of dollars because they are more in tune with their audience. That's what's happened to the YouTube model, because so you find people like doing like really crazy things on YouTube and becoming millionaires, and it's crazy. And that's because it's easy to create content in that medium, and they tell their own story. And I think that right now I don't see any platform that actually makes that possible. The only reason I'm sticking with OpenSim, I tend to be like a loyal dog. I usually tell myself that. And when I pick a platform, I try to push it and try to make things work. And also because I found that at very regularly I'm thinking of should I jump ship? Is that good for business or etc. There's millions of ways to to move forward, and it's not always easy. So right now I'm just sticking with OpenSim because it has been good to me. It's allowing me to make a living, and I've actually generated quite significant funding that allows me to live in the real world with that amount, with that kind of funding, and try to advance the platform in not as a core developer, but try to do it at an application level. So that's probably what I have to say.
Thank you, Ramesh. And for you, let's see. You could tell it's getting late in the day, Nib. Krista, for you, when it comes to user content generation and for competing platforms as far as the strengths and weaknesses, what do you think about that?
So I will answer that question, but then if you don't mind, I will ask another question, and I will answer that other question that I think is more important. Okay?
Absolutely.
So there, I think that Neb already mentioned that there's and Adam also mentioned, when it comes to 3D content, there's these, there's the 1% and the 99%. The 1% is the super high-end tools that only 1% of the people can use, because the learning curve for those things is gigantic and very hard to use, and it just takes a very long time to get proficient in those tools. And it creates amazing things, but it just takes too long. And then there's the other 99%, which use things like SketchUp and OpenSim and things like that, and that is super simple. You don't get, the content, the graphical is not very good, but you can create a lot of interesting things with that. And there's something in between, which is Unity 3D, that it's not terribly complicated, and it kind of you kind of are able to get a little bit more proficient as you go. It's not as complicated as the other end tools. So I agree that in order for these technologies to actually get better and actually get adopted, you need to democratize content creation, because if people are not used to understanding what 3D content is, they are going to always be very suspicious of joining these environments that are created by other people. And so this is what leads me to the other question that I think is more interesting with respect to the virtual reality platforms of the future. Gaming has been in this niche for a very long time, and the gaming industry is totally got a handle of what's going on, the dominance of everything that's going on in terms of rendering engines, in terms of processes for producing these games and all that stuff. They have figured it out. They're dominating this space, and games are great for playing. Now, what I personally find more interesting in terms of challenging is to use these technologies for things that are not games. And so I am very determined. I'm very worried about the environment. I'm very worried about people traveling all the time for conferences and for meetings and whatnot. That's my life basically. I hate to travel. I would love that people would basically stop traveling unless it's absolutely necessary and start engaging over these new technologies over the internet. And these virtual environments are great for potentially for doing something like that. Unfortunately, when you go beyond the realm of the gamers and you go talk to my colleagues in university or even to graduate students, they are very, very reluctant in using technologies like this for meetings. They don't like it. They prefer anything that does not have an avatar. They prefer Slack, they prefer Google Hangouts, Skype, anything, as long as it doesn't have a sort of a puppet in a way that is not a faithful representation of who they are. So that makes them very uncomfortable. So I think that the challenge is, how do we, bridge the gap to using these fantastic technologies that the gaming industry has been developing and we are kind of following through? How can we leverage this to actually make it mainstream for beyond the games? And I think that's a really interesting question. And I think the question, I'm talking about several years down the road. I think that the answer there is going to be a mixture of having realistic avatars, so avatars that are actual reality representations of how the people look like, that are able to take the mannerisms of the person themselves, that are able to follow in real time the gesturing, the facial expressions, and everything, that people can believe that it's almost like the video stream on Google Hangouts, except that it's a lower resolution video stream, because an avatar can actually, and the movements of the avatar can be quite compressed with respect to video. So going in that direction of being able to represent people in virtuality without being the video, so in 3D somehow, and being able to project and do a sort of add the third dimension to it rather than just a 2-dimension to it. That I think is going to be what I would like these technologies to evolve to. I mean, the gaming industry, it's all right. It's all right. They're leading. They're fine. It's the use of these technologies that I think is a huge potential for non-gaming applications, and that's, I think, where I am more worried and more interested in kind of figuring out how to do that. And that's what I would like to actually see these platforms going through. And for that, I think we need to work on input devices to capture what people are doing in the physical world and transport that into the virtual world, and to capture the person themselves to be a little bit more faithful representation if they want. So that's what I think is the future, what I would like the future to be.
Thank you, Krista. That was wonderful. So Neb, I know you and Krista work very closely together. So why don't we put a little different spin on that and say, what is your wish list for what you'd like to see possible in the future? And do you have any thoughts about strengths and weaknesses of VR platforms while we're thinking about user content generation?
Sure.
Over to you.
Sure. Well, I can sum this all up in what I'm actually doing at my day job with Incitra. So what we do at Incitra is we build these really gigantic city models in Open Simulator, equivalent to 100 to 150 Second Life region size models in very high detail of cities with streets and all the street furniture and lighting and, traffic simulations. And then we allow the cities and interested parties to make additions to the city for projects that they're working on and stuff like that. And it really works well in OpenSim because we can collaboratively build these cities and models in real time. But the thing is, when we deliver to the clients at the end of the project, we're usually delivering them a video of what we do. And it's really hard to make videos of models in OpenSim that are 120 second life size regions. It's very slow. As you move across, you see things popping in and out, and you get lag as you cross over borders. And there's all these kinds of deficiencies. And our customers complain a lot because our videos are laggy and they're just not what they expect. They want to see something that looks a little more realistic, something that looks like something they were seeing on an Xbox or PlayStation, or on these high definition long renders that come out of Maya, or stuff like that, where it takes 2 weeks to render a 5-minute video. So what we've been experimenting lately is that we don't want to abandon OpenSim. We want to keep using OpenSim because we've written a lot of tools and we really like our workflow there. But so what I've been doing is I've been playing with this OR converter tool that lets me take OpenSim OR archives that AI Austin had worked on, and some people at the Japanese university, which their names elude me at the moment. But they wrote this really great tool that lets you take an OR backup file and dump it out to Collada files, and they have some custom shaders, and you can import it right into Unity, which then allows me to basically take our final OpenSim model and bring it into Unity and do some enhancements in there, add some fancy lighting, add some fancy clouds, tweak some shaders here and there, put some fancy fountains. And then there's lots of really great tools for cameras where you can define camera paths, and you can have these really nice flowing movements of cameras and make these really, really cool animation scenes, like you would see in a video game, like cutscene type of things. And then they have some really cool plugins for Unity that let you do really slow type rendering, like 1 frame every 2 minutes in 8K resolution, or make 360 photosphere type videos that you can put up on YouTube, and you can kind of spin the camera around as your camera path moves along it. And this has really opened up the door to be able to let us keep using Open Simulator, but also provide these really high-end quality graphics to our customers at the end of the project without having to hire super skilled video game designer or super skilled architect type people who understand how to use some of these really advanced tools like 3D Studio Max, and using some of the really fancy rendering like V-Ray and stuff like that, which are, also quite expensive to really, if you bring in 20, 30 people and you have to buy 20, 30 licenses for all this software, you're talking about $1 million investment, which is, makes it hard to be competitive unless you're a really big company with lots of capital. So this is one way that we're, bridging and kind of taking the next step without kind of abandoning years of work that we put into some of the older tools that we're using. And it's really nice. And that's one of the really nice things about Unity, is that it's open, it's very open, and it's very extensible, and you can program it to make it do things that it doesn't do out of the box. And there's lots of really great add-ons and stuff like that. And yeah, in fact, I can post a link for you guys to look at. This is something I did for Sine Wave, just kind of messing around. But you can see here what I'm talking about with the camera pads. This is actually the tools we use for Incitra to make these really high quality videos. And it's pretty neat. But this is kind of, what we're doing.
Great. Thanks, Neb.
Yeah.
And for you, Adam, so I know you were talking about user content generation, and you were thinking everything from the design tools for designer developers, and then you started talking about the user experience. As you think about the strengths and weaknesses of competing VR platforms and this user content generation, what does this mean to you?
Well, I think that Krista sort of broached on the topic of sort of 1% versus 99%. I actually have some statistics on that one, which I'll be happy to share. So when you break out a typical virtual world with a fair number of users, like for instance Second Life or IMVU, what you find is about 97. Sorry, not 97. No, it is. Sorry, it's 97% of the users never touch the content creation tools. So you think about that. You line up 100 avatars, only 3 of them are actually creating content. Of those 3 who are creating content, if you break those out and you break it out into percentages again, 70% of them, so really 2 out of those 3, are going to be remixers. So what they're doing is they're doing things like downloading texture PSDs and making their own changes to them. And then finally, you've got the remaining 1%, and that's the actual people who know the tools and know what they're working on, and they're the ones who actually build the vast bulk of the content that's in most virtual worlds, and certainly all the really high-end, impressive content. So what we've been trying to do, and look, I can probably say strengths and weaknesses of a whole bunch of topics, but really I think I'm the specialist on Unity and space here in particular, by virtue of the fact that I run the place. And I think that what we've tried to do is we've tried to break things out into those groups accordingly. So what we've done is we've added, for instance, a clothing customizer that lets people paint on their clothes and save those out. So when they buy it from the store, you can click customize and go ahead and paint over your clothes. Likewise, we took our issue of how do people build in their own homes. And if most of those users don't have any familiarity with the build systems, then we're barking up the wrong tree because most of the users aren't going to be able to do it. So what we did is we looked at some of the competing applications that sort of fill those needs. We looked at The Sims in particular because it's a very large, very popular game that has solved these problems for a very mass market audience. We actually said, okay, well, all right, our in-world building tools are going to be based on The Sims. And we'll have an external flow designed for people who are comfortable working with those high-end tools. So we'll try and do both at the same time. We'll deal with easy to use for people who want to actually work on those platforms, and we'll deal with full power, create AAA-looking content for the people who can do that too. And I think that's an important approach to take because you do have this stratification of user prowess and how skilled they are and how skilled they want to be. It's not just that 97% of the users doesn't know how to do things, it's that they don't want to do things. And that's I think a very important point. You can make the tools as easy as you like, but you've got to realize that most of those users do not want to advance up to the more sophisticated workflows. So there's no point trying to push them down into that path because all they'll do is say, this is too hard and quit. And as disappointing as that is, that's really the nature of things. So if you want collaborative experiences, and we're actually expanding out those in-world The Sims style tools at the very moment to try and actually bring in the high-end 3D tools, so all your 3D translation, rotation, and scale gizmos and things as an option that you can turn on. So we can sort of begin to provide a middle ground as well for that middle 3% who are sort of the more of the mixers. And those tools actually on our platform will be collaborative, so you can actually get multiple people working on them side by side in a region, which we think is kind of cool. But there are other options as well. I mean, big game studios and things have to deal with these same issues of collaborative building. They don't build in isolation. A AAA video game these days has about 2,000 people working on it. And 2,000 developers working simultaneously, you bet they have good collaboration tools because, frankly, it all falls to bits if you don't. So there is sort of options available. And again, by virtue of working with a good gaming platform, there's lots of extensions and plugins and things that these studios are using to achieve that that you can use as well.
Thank you. So as we start to wrap up our panel, and I know we have 5 minutes left, first off, if there are any questions from the audience, please feel welcome to let us know. So why don't we conclude with your wish list for the future? I mean, if you had your dream tool or dream capability, and I know each of you have touched on this, but let's say you're going to go for something that's not necessarily feasible today, what might it be? And Ramesh, we'll start with you. He's probably saying, I'm inventing that dream tool. Because we've seen some amazing sessions from you, Ramesh. We can't hear your voice yet, though, so you might want to check the mute.
Sorry. All right. Yeah, I just muted myself because okay. Well, it's kind of that's a very challenging question for me. Well, as a platform, of course, you want a platform that's very flexible and that allows you to work at different levels of abstraction. You can actually go as deep as you want and make changes over there. And my whole approach of doing things has always been a user interface centric approach. That is, you don't start from the mechanics of the architecture and then dream up of an application on top. Start thinking, from an interface level, and then try to dive down and try to, like a craftsman, try to bring modules and things together just to make, the kind of interactivity I would like possible. So if there is a platform that would allow, people to make those changes easily and at all these different abstraction levels, then that would be like an ideal platform. I think that's how I would, dream of. I mean, that's what I hope would be available in the future.
Thank you. And Krista, I know that you're focused on meetings and connections and environmental issues, but for you personally, if you had your dream tool for you, what would it be?
Very high-end graphics, super easy content creation that even I can do, and I completely suck at creating. I don't know how to use Blender. I don't have no idea how to model mesh and stuff like that. I don't know. I can do prims, and that's about it. So it has to be super easy that people like me can actually do it. And integrated tooling that takes care of collaborative builds and history. So things like version control and things like that, and immediate real-time rendering of what is it that you are building. What else? Super good capabilities for scripting. Super awesome capabilities for controlling from external scripts. Let me see what else. And open source, of course, because I'm in a university and I love things that are in the public domain. So that's my dream tool.
Thank you. Well, we only have a minute left, so Neb, do you have a quickie before we go to Adam?
Yeah, I mean, mine's similar to what Krista said. I want something that kind of falls in between, like a Blender interface with Unity's abilities, with the openness of Open Simulator, to be able to host it on my own hardware and things like that. So yeah, very similar to Chris and I do the same things most of the time. So I'll leave it at that. And
for you, Adam, what's your wish?
I'm going to take a different tack. I'm going to say accessibility. I think that the ultimate feature for a virtual world is one where you can talk to anyone on the planet and say, hey, check this out, and be able to get them in there in a second at a moment's notice, no matter where they are or what they're doing or what they're capable, what hardware and things they've got accessible to them. And that includes also very quick loading times and all the rest of that comes with that. But I think the ultimate virtual world would be something that's easy to use as a web browser and ubiquitous as one.
Wonderful, and thank you. Thank you, Michael, Adam, Krista, and Ramesh for a terrific presentation. As a reminder to our audience, you can see what's coming up on the conference schedule at conference.opensimulator.org. Following this session at 5:30 p.m. will be the sad, sorry state of weapons development. We encourage you to visit the OSCC16 Poster Expo in the OSCC Expo Zone 3 region to find accompanying info on presentations and explore the Hypergrid Tour resources in OSCC Expo Zone 2, along with the sponsor and crowdfunder booths located throughout all of the OSCC Expo regions, of which there are 5. Thank you again to our speakers and to the audience.
Lyr, can I just say something? I'm sorry. Can I hijack this little break, because I meant to say something yesterday on the developers panel in the morning, and then I didn't have time and I forgot. But I really don't want to let this conference pass without acknowledging, taking a little somber tone here. We lost a person who was a very all-time contributor to the Open Simulator ecosystem. His name is Latif Khalifa. And he was the original, one of the original developers of LibOMV, LibSL, and he was also collaborating. He never really contributed to OpenSim directly, but he was always talking to us. He was absolutely always the go-to person for anything related to the protocol of Second Life. And he had been sick for a while, and during this year things turned for the worst, and he passed away. And so I wanted to just publicly thank him wherever he is, and acknowledge his work and his contributions to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista.